At 2:47 p.m. on June 14, 1993, three brothers walked into the Palmetto Springs community pool in Florida. By 3:15 p.m., they had vanished without a trace. No screams, no struggle, no witnesses. Just three pairs of flip-flops lined up perfectly by the pool's edge and towels still damp from their last swim. For 30 years, investigators believed Ethan, Marcus, and Joey Castellano, ages 8, 10, and 6, had been abducted from the busy public pool. Until August 2023, when a massive sinkhole opened up beneath the abandoned facility and exposed something that made seasoned FBI agents physically sick. The boys never left the pool at all. They'd been there the entire time, 30 feet underground, in a chamber system so sophisticated it had hidden one of America's largest child trafficking networks for decades. What investigators found down there wasn't just evidence of the Castellano brothers' fate. It was proof that dozens of other families had been destroyed by the same system. And the most shocking discovery? The perpetrators were still operating, still taking children, still destroying lives. This is the story of how a routine sinkhole inspection cracked open a case that would expose a multi-state criminal network, reveal the truth about 400 missing children, and prove that sometimes the most innocent places hide the darkest secrets. Subscribe now if you're ready for the most disturbing cold case breakthrough in decades, because this story will change how you think about community pools, missing children, and the predators hiding in plain sight. Hashtag June 14th, 1993. Location: Palmetto Springs, Florida. The heat rose from the concrete in shimmering waves, the kind of suffocating Florida summer heat that made even the palm trees look tired. The Palmetto Springs community pool buzzed with the familiar chaos of summer vacation. Children shrieking with laughter, the sharp blast of lifeguard whistles, and the steady hum of pool filters working overtime against the relentless sun. Maria Castellano spread sunscreen on her youngest son's shoulders, squinting against the glare reflecting off the chlorinated water. Joey, just 6 years old with sun-bleached hair and a gap-toothed grin, squirmed impatiently under her hands. "Hold still, Mijo," she murmured, rubbing the white cream into his freckled skin. "You burn like paper." Her older boys, Ethan and Marcus, had already claimed their territory at the deep end. 10-year-old Marcus was the natural athlete, lean, confident, showing off his cannonball technique to a group of admiring kids. 8-year-old Ethan was quieter, more cautious, content to practice his backstroke in the deeper water where the other children couldn't splash him. 1 hour. Maria called to them, checking her Timex watch. "Then we go home for lunch." Marcus gave her a thumbs up from the pool's edge. Ethan waved from the water. Joey bounced on his toes, eager to join his brothers. "Promise you'll watch each other," Maria said, the same words she'd repeated every pool visit since they'd moved to Palmetto Springs 3 months earlier. The boys had learned to swim in their grandmother's pool in Miami, but this public pool was different. Bigger, deeper, more crowded. "We promise, Mama," Ethan called back, his voice carrying across the water. Those were the last words Maria Castellano would ever hear her son speak. At 2:47 p.m., Maria returned from her errands to find the lifeguard, a college student named Brad Morrison, standing beside 3 pairs of flip-flops arranged in a perfect line at the pool's edge. The towels she'd brought, a Mickey Mouse beach towel for Joey, a solid blue one for Marcus, and Ethan's favorite with the Ninja Turtles, were still spread across the plastic lounge chairs, weighted down with their water bottles and bags of goldfish crackers. "Ma'am," Brad said, his voice tight with barely contained panic, "I can't find your boys." Maria's world tilted. "What do you mean you can't find them?" "They were here," Brad stammered, pointing toward the deep end. "All 3 of them. I saw them maybe 20 minutes ago, but when I did my rotation count." He trailed off, his face pale despite his summer tan. The Palmetto Springs Police Department arrived within minutes. Officers dragged the pool with nets, checked every corner of the facility, questioned every family present. The boys' belongings sat untouched, their shoes perfectly aligned, as if they'd simply stepped out of them and evaporated into the humid Florida air. By evening, volunteer search teams combed the surrounding neighborhoods. Helicopters circled overhead with searchlights. Bloodhounds followed scent trails that led nowhere. The local news crews set up their vans in the pool parking lot, their harsh lights illuminating the yellow crime scene tape that now surrounded the facility. But Ethan, Marcus, and Joey Castellano were gone. No witnesses saw them leave. No security cameras captured their departure. No ransom notes arrived. They had simply vanished from a crowded public pool in broad daylight, leaving behind only their flip-flops and the echo of their mother's final words, "Watch each other." The Palmetto Springs community pool was permanently closed 3 weeks later. Hashtag August 15th, 2023. Location: Palmetto Springs, Florida. The sinkhole opened up at 4:23 a.m. on a Tuesday, swallowing a 20-foot section of the old pool deck with a sound like thunder splitting the earth. Detective Sarah Chun got the call at dawn, not because missing children were her specialty, but because the Castellano case file was still on her desk, still labeled active after 3 decades of dead ends and false leads. "Sinkhole?" she asked into her phone, squinting at the orange numbers on her alarm clock. "Yeah, but that's not why I'm calling," said Lieutenant Rodriguez from the scene. "The hole exposed something underneath the old pool area. Looks like some kind of chamber or tunnel system." "And Chun?" His voice dropped. "We found children's clothing. Sarah was dressed and in her car within 10 minutes. The drive to the abandoned pool complex took her through neighborhoods she remembered from the original investigation, streets where she'd knocked on doors as a rookie detective, following up on tips that led nowhere. Palmetto Springs had changed little in 30 years. Same Spanish tile roofs, same palm trees drooping over manicured lawns, same sense of suburban security that had made the Castellano disappearance so shocking. The old pool sat behind a chain-link fence topped with razor wire, officially condemned but never demolished. The sinkhole had opened directly beneath where the diving board used to be, creating a jagged crater in the concrete that revealed something no one had expected to find. Sarah ducked under the crime scene tape and approached the edge. 20 feet down, clearly visible in the morning light, was a concrete chamber. Not a natural cave. This was man-made, reinforced, deliberately constructed. A steel ladder built into one wall led down into darkness. "Jesus," she whispered. "Gets weirder," Rodriguez said, handing her a sealed evidence bag. Inside was a small blue sneaker, child-sized, with a Velcro strap. "Found it on the first rung of the ladder. Looks like it's been down there for decades." Sarah stared at the shoe through the plastic. In the original case file, Maria Castellano had described her boy's clothing in detail. Ethan had been wearing blue Velcro sneakers, his special shoes that he'd picked out himself. Anyone been down there yet? Waiting for structural engineers and the crime scene unit. "But Chun," Rodriguez lowered his voice. "There's more than one chamber down there. This thing extends under the entire pool complex." By noon, the site was crawling with FBI agents, forensic specialists, and engineers with ground-penetrating radar. The structural assessment revealed what Sarah had begun to suspect. The chamber system wasn't a recent addition. It was old, built into the original pool construction in the 1980s, hidden in plain sight for over 30 years. Special Agent Michael Torres from the FBI's Tampa field office took lead on the investigation. Dark-haired, methodical, with the kind of quiet intensity that made witnesses want to confess before he even asked a question. "Detective Chun," he said, approaching her at the command tent they'd set up in the pool parking lot. "I understand you've been carrying this case for how long?" 15 years, Sarah replied. "Picked it up when Detective Martinez retired. He worked it for the first 15. Torres nodded. "What's your gut feeling about this discovery?" Sarah looked at the sinkhole, where teams were now setting up equipment to safely access the underground chambers. "My gut says those boys never left this property. And somebody went to a hell of a lot of trouble to make sure they were never found." The first chamber was accessed at 3:15 p.m. Torres descended the ladder himself, followed by a forensic photographer and a crime scene specialist. Sarah waited at the surface, radio in hand, listening to their terse communications from below. "Chamber 1 is approximately 12 feet by 8 feet. Torres's voice crackled through the static. "Concrete walls, no windows. Air circulation system built into the ceiling." A pause. "Then, we've got personal items. Children's clothing, toys, what looks like bedding." Sarah closed her eyes. "Any human remains?" Another pause. Longer this time. "Negative on remains in Chamber 1. But there's a sealed door at the far end. This system is bigger than we thought." Hashtag June 14th, 1993. Location: Palmetto Springs Community Pool. 2:30 p.m. Marcus Castellano executed a perfect cannonball from the diving board, sending a splash of chlorinated water across the pool deck. He surfaced with a whoop of triumph, slicking his dark hair back from his face. "Did you see that, Ethan?" he called to his younger brother, who was floating on his back near the pool's edge. "That was at least an 8. Ethan rolled over, treading water with lazy kicks. "Mom said no more diving. She'll be mad if she comes back and finds you." "She's not coming back for like an hour," Marcus interrupted, swimming over to where little Joey sat on the pool's edge, feet dangling in the water. "Come on, Joe. Your turn to jump." Joey shook his head vigorously. "Too deep. I can't touch." "That's why you jump, dummy. You don't need to touch." Marcus grabbed his youngest brother under the arms and lifted him into the water. Joey squealed with delight and terror, his arms wrapping around Marcus's neck. The lifeguard, Brad Morrison, was dealing with a minor crisis at the shallow end, a toddler who'd slipped and scraped his knee. He glanced toward the deep end where the Castellano boys were playing, made a mental note that they seemed fine, and turned his attention back to the crying child. That's when the maintenance man appeared. He was older, maybe 60, wearing faded blue coveralls with Palmetto Pool Service embroidered on the chest pocket. He carried a large toolbox and moved with the confident purposefulness of someone who belonged there. None of the families paid him any attention. Maintenance workers were invisible at public pools, just part of the background noise of summer. "Hey there, boys," he said quietly, approaching the edge of the pool where Marcus was teaching Joey to float. His voice was gravelly but kind, the tone of a grandfather talking to his grandchildren. "Having fun?" Marcus looked up, squinting against the sun. "Yes, sir." Good. "Listen, I need to check the filter intake down at this end of the pool. Safety inspection, you know. Would you boys mind helping me out for just a minute?" Ethan swam closer, curiosity overcoming his natural caution. "Help how?" The man smiled, the kind of warm, trustworthy smile that put children at ease. "Oh, just need someone small enough to check that the intake grates are secure. Sometimes they work loose, and we can't have anyone getting hurt. It'll just take a second, and I've got some cold sodas in my truck for helpers." Joey's eyes lit up. "Sodas? Diet Coke, Sprite, whatever you want. But first, let's just make sure everything's safe down there. Come on, I'll show you where the equipment room is. Your mama will be so proud that you helped keep the pool safe for everyone." The maintenance room was behind the pool house, accessible through a door marked "Authorized Personnel Only." The man produced a key from his coveralls, unlocking it with practiced ease. "Wow," Joey breathed, staring at the maze of pipes and electrical equipment inside. "It's like a spaceship." "That's right," the man said, his hand resting gently on Joey's shoulder. "This is where all the magic happens. The pumps that keep the water clean, the heaters that keep it warm. Want to see how deep the system goes?" He led them to what looked like a maintenance hatch in the floor, hidden behind a bank of humming machinery. The metal cover was heavy, requiring adult strength to lift, but underneath was a ladder leading down into darkness. "It's like a secret tunnel," Marcus said, his voice echoing slightly in the confined space. "Exactly like that," the man agreed. "The whole pool system runs underground. Pipes, filters, holding tanks. Most people don't even know it exists. Want to take a look?" The boys hesitated for just a moment. They'd been taught not to go places with strangers, but this wasn't a stranger exactly. This was a worker, someone official, someone who belonged here. And they were just looking at pool equipment, not going anywhere dangerous. "Just for a minute," Ethan said finally. "Then we need to get back before Mom comes." "Of course," the man said. "Just for a minute." One by one, the boys climbed down the ladder into the darkness below. The man followed, pulling the heavy hatch closed above them with a sound like a coffin lid slamming shut. Back at the pool, the lifeguard finished applying a Band-Aid to the toddler's knee and resumed his position in the high chair. He glanced toward the deep end, expecting to see the 3 Castellano boys still playing in the water. The pool was empty except for a few older kids doing laps at the far end. Brad frowned, scanning the deck area, the shallow end, the pool house. The boys' belongings were still there: shoes, towels, snacks. They had to be around somewhere. Maybe they'd gone to the bathroom, or to get a drink from the concession stand. He made a note to keep an eye out for them, and turned his attention to a group of teenagers who were getting too rowdy near the diving board. 20 minutes later, when Maria Castellano returned from her errands, the Palmetto Springs community pool looked exactly as she'd left it. Families scattered across the deck, children splashing in the water, the steady rhythm of summer vacation in full swing. Everything was normal except for one impossible detail. Her 3 sons had vanished without a trace. Hashtag August 15th, 2023. Location, underground chamber system, Palmetto Springs. The second chamber was larger than the first and significantly more disturbing. Agent Torres emerged from the underground system after nearly 2 hours below ground, his face grim and his usually pressed suit rumpled with dust and sweat. How many chambers total? Detective Chun asked as he stripped off his protective gear. 7 that we've found so far, all connected by narrow tunnels. Some are storage areas, others. He paused, choosing his words carefully. Others appear to have been living spaces. Makeshift bedrooms. Sarah felt her stomach clench. Living spaces? Torres nodded toward the forensic photographer, who was uploading images to a laptop set up under the command tent. See for yourself. The photographs showed a nightmare hidden beneath suburban normalcy. Chamber 3 contained 3 small cots, arranged in a row against one wall. Stained mattresses, thin blankets, and a bucket in the corner that Sarah didn't want to think about. Chamber 4 held children's toys, action figures, coloring books, a few stuffed animals that looked hand-sewn and well-loved. Jesus Christ, Sarah whispered. How long were they down there? That's what we need to figure out. But Chun. Torres pulled up another photograph. Look at Chamber 5. The image showed what appeared to be a crude classroom or study area. A small table with 3 chairs, all child-sized. Workbooks and pencils scattered across the surface. On the concrete wall, someone had drawn a calendar in chalk. Not dates, but tally marks. Hundreds of them, organized in groups of 7. Weeks, Sarah said, counting quickly. Maybe months. And that's not all. Torres clicked to the next image. Chamber 6 appears to be some kind of workshop. Woodworking tools, electronics equipment, what looks like surveillance monitors. And Chamber 7. The final photograph showed a space that chilled Sarah to her core. The walls were covered with photographs, dozens of them, all showing children at various public pools throughout Central Florida. Some photos looked recent, others were clearly older, faded with age. At the center of the collection, pinned to the wall with red pushpins, were 3 school photos that Sarah recognized immediately. Ethan, Marcus, and Joey Castellano, smiling at the camera in their 1992-93 school portraits. He was watching them, Sarah said. Stalking them before he took them. Torres nodded. This wasn't random. This was planned, organized, systematic. And the chambers themselves, when were they built? Forensic engineers estimate the concrete was poured in 1985 during the original pool construction, which means someone's been using this system for almost 40 years. Sarah closed the laptop, unable to look at any more photographs. We're not dealing with a simple abduction case. We're dealing with a predator who built himself a hunting ground. The next discovery came at sunset, when the search team found Chamber 8 hidden behind a false wall. Unlike the others, this chamber contained something the team hadn't expected, evidence of recent activity. Fresh water bottles, a camping chair that showed little wear, and a stack of newspapers from 2020 to 2022. Someone's been coming back here, Torres said, his voice tight with controlled anger. Even after the pool closed, even after all these years, they've been maintaining this place. Sarah stared at the evidence bags being loaded into FBI vehicles. 30 years of searching, 30 years of wondering what happened to 3 little boys, and the answer had been right here all along, hidden beneath their feet, invisible to a community that thought they were safe. Sir, a forensic tech called from near the original sinkhole. We found something else. They'd uncovered a 9th chamber, this one sealed differently from the others. Where the previous chambers had simple doorways, this one was blocked by a heavy steel door with multiple locks. It took the FBI's entry team nearly an hour to cut through the reinforced barrier. What they found inside changed everything. The chamber was small, cramped, with just enough room for a single person. The walls were covered in writing, childish handwriting scratched into the concrete with what looked like a nail or piece of metal. Names, dates, messages. And in the center of one wall, written in larger letters that had been traced over and over until they were deeply etched into the stone. Ethan Marcus Joey, 1993 to 1995. Below that, in smaller text, we tried to be good. And at the bottom, in what looked like a different hand, older, more controlled, they graduated. Agent Torres stood in the doorway of the sealed chamber, his flashlight beam playing across the desperate scratches in the wall. Detective Chun, he said quietly, I think we need to start looking for these boys as adults. Hashtag September 3rd, 1995. Location, underground chamber system, Palmetto Springs. The lessons had become routine after 2 years. Every morning at 8 o'clock, the man they'd learned to call teacher would unlock the heavy door and enter their chamber with a folding table and 3 plastic chairs. Reading, writing, arithmetic, the same subjects they would have been learning in a real school if they'd still been living in the real world. Ethan, now 10 years old, sat at his chair with perfect posture. His younger brother Marcus, 8, fidgeted beside him. Little Joey, who'd turned 6 in captivity, struggled to hold his pencil correctly as he copied letters from a workbook. Very good, Ethan, teacher said, reviewing the older boy's math worksheet. Your multiplication tables are excellent. Marcus, you need to concentrate more. And Joey, he crouched down beside the youngest boy, his voice taking on that tone of infinite patience that somehow made everything worse. Remember what we talked about? Stay inside the lines. Joey's hand trembled as he erased a crooked letter and tried again. They'd all learned that disappointing teacher had consequences, not violence, nothing so simple as that. Just the removal of small comforts. No dessert with dinner. No story at bedtime. No time in the exercise chamber where they could run around and pretend they were still normal children. Now then, teacher said, setting up a small television on the table. It was connected to some kind of player that showed grainy footage of other children. Children swimming, playing, laughing in the sunshine. Time for your social studies lesson. This was the hardest part. Teacher would show them videos of other families, other children living normal lives, and explain why such a life was no longer possible for them. The outside world was dangerous, he told them. Their parents had given up looking for them. No one remembered them anymore. They were safe here, protected, cared for in a way the cruel outside world never could. Do you see how chaotic it is up there? Teacher asked, pausing the video on an image of children running through a sprinkler in someone's backyard. No structure, no purpose. Children left to raise themselves while their parents work and fight and abandon them. Ethan stared at the screen, trying to remember what grass felt like under his bare feet. The memory was getting hazier, like trying to recall a dream after waking up. Sometimes he could barely remember his mother's face, though he tried to picture it every night before falling asleep. Down here, you have purpose, teacher continued. You have education, safety, 3 meals a day, and most importantly, you have each other. Brothers who will never leave you, never disappoint you, never grow up to become the kind of adults who hurt children. Joey raised his small hand. When can we see Mama? Teacher's expression didn't change, but something shifted in his eyes. Joey, we've talked about this. Your mama lives in the dangerous world now. She's become one of the adults who can't be trusted. But you have a new family here. Your brothers and me. Isn't that enough? The 6-year-old nodded quickly, sensing the undercurrent of warning in the question. They'd all learned to sense those warnings. After the lesson, teacher packed up his materials and returned them to Chamber 7, which he called his office. The boys were left alone in their chamber, 12 feet by 10 feet, with 3 cots, a small sink, and a chemical toilet that teacher emptied twice a week. They weren't chained or locked in. They could move freely between several of the chambers during recreational hours. But they all understood that trying to leave, trying to climb the ladder that led to the surface, would mean losing their brothers forever. Teacher had been very clear about that rule. I had a dream about the pool again, Marcus whispered that night as they lay on their cots in the darkness. He'd been having the dreams more often lately. Memories of chlorinated water and sunshine that felt like torture when he woke up in the underground chamber. Don't talk about that, Ethan said automatically. They'd learned that teachers sometimes listened to their conversations after lights out. Talking about the before times was discouraged. But Joey, who was too young to fully understand the rules, rolled over on his cot. I dreamed about Mama's cooking. Remember how she made those little cookies with the sprinkles? Ethan felt his throat tighten. He did remember. Sunday afternoon baking sessions, flour on the kitchen counter, Joey standing on a step stool to help measure ingredients. The memory was so vivid it hurt. "We can't think about that stuff," he said, though his voice lacked conviction. "Teacher says it just makes us sad." "But what if Mama is looking for us?" Joey persisted. "What if she's sad because she can't find us?" Ethan closed his eyes, trying to block out the question that had haunted him for 2 years. If their mother was looking for them, why hadn't she found them? They were right here, right under the pool where she'd left them. How could she not know? Maybe Teacher was right. Maybe she had stopped looking. Maybe she'd decided that 3 missing children were too much trouble, too much pain. Maybe she'd moved on, started a new family, forgotten all about the boys who disappeared one summer afternoon. The thought made Ethan feel sick, but it also made sense. Adults abandoned children all the time. Teacher had shown them videos proving it. Parents who were too busy, too tired, too selfish to properly care for their sons and daughters. At least here, in the chambers, they were wanted. They were important to someone. "Go to sleep," Ethan told his brothers. "Tomorrow we start learning about geography." But sleep was difficult in the chambers. The air circulation system hummed constantly, and sometimes they could hear sounds from the surface. Children's voices, splashing water, the echo of normal life continuing without them. Those sounds had become fainter over the years as vegetation grew over the pool and the facility fell into disrepair, but on quiet nights, they could still hear the ghost of their former lives. Ethan lay on his cot, staring at the concrete ceiling, and tried to remember what his mother's voice sounded like when she called his name. The memory was slipping away, eroding like sand, leaving behind only the steady, patient voice of Teacher and the promise that this was better, safer, more loving than anything the outside world could offer. By morning, he'd almost convinced himself it was true. ## August 16th, 2023. Location, FBI Tampa Field Office. The evidence room looked like a shrine to systematic abuse. 3 decades of investigation had been compressed into neat rows of evidence boxes, each labeled with dates, locations, and the heartbreaking inventory of 3 children's lives. Clothing, blue sneaker, child size 2, personal effects, Ninja Turtle towel, photographs, Chamber 7 wall. Detective Chun sat across from Agent Torres at a metal table covered with case files. Between them lay the most disturbing discovery from the underground chambers, a journal, hand-bound with what looked like pages torn from children's workbooks. The writing inside progressed from the careful printing of a 10-year-old to the more sophisticated script of a teenager. "It's definitely Ethan's handwriting," Sarah said, comparing the journal entries to the boys' school records from 1993. "Starts when he was about 12, continues until..." She flipped to the final entry. "Until he was roughly 17. Torres leaned forward. "What does it say?" Sarah read aloud from one of the earlier entries. Day 847. "Teacher says we're ready for advanced studies. Marcus scored highest on the mathematics test. Joey can now read at a 5th grade level. I helped him with the difficult words. Teacher is pleased with our progress." She turned the page. Day 903. Marcus asked about the surface again. Teacher explained that the world above has become even more dangerous. War, disease, children hurt by their own parents. We are fortunate to be protected here. I explained this to Marcus. He understands now. Torres's jaw tightened. Classic indoctrination techniques. Isolation, dependency, fear of the outside world. It gets worse. Sarah found a passage from later in the journal. Day 1247. Teacher says we are almost ready for graduation. We have learned everything we need to know about safety, about family, about protecting other children from the dangers we escaped. Soon we will be old enough to help other families understand what we understand. She looked up at Torres. Graduation. He was grooming them to become accomplices. The evidence supported that terrifying conclusion. Chamber 7, which they now knew had been Teacher's headquarters, contained detailed files on dozens of children throughout Central Florida. Surveillance photographs, school schedules, family routines, all organized in manila folders with clinical precision. "Look at this," Torres said, opening one of the folders. Inside were photographs of a family at a different community pool, dated 1997. 3 children, 2 girls and a boy, ages approximately 7, 9, and 11. Paper clipped to their photos was a handwritten note. Prospects. Adequate isolation, busy parents, minimal supervision. Sarah felt her skin crawl. How many families did he target? We've found files on at least 30 families dating from 1985 to 2020. Some are marked acquired, others unsuitable, and a few. Torres pulled out another folder. A few are marked graduate training. The graduate training folder contains something that made Sarah's blood run cold. Recent photographs of children at various Florida pools, all taken from concealed positions. The images were crisp, digital, clearly shot within the last few years. And in the corner of several photos, barely visible, were adult figures watching from the background. He's still active, Sarah said. 30 years later, he's still hunting. Torres nodded grimly. And if Ethan's journal is accurate, he's not hunting alone anymore. They spent the afternoon cross-referencing the surveillance files with missing persons reports from across Florida. The pattern that emerged was chilling in its consistency. Children disappearing from public pools, families destroyed by inexplicable vanishings, investigations that went nowhere because there was never any evidence of foul play. Look at this, Sarah said, pulling up a case from 1998. Twin sisters, ages 8 and 10, disappeared from a hotel pool in Orlando. Last seen by the lifeguard at 3:15 p.m., gone by 3:45. No witnesses, no suspicious activity reported. Torres found another case. Boy, age 9, vanished from a YMCA pool in Tampa, 2003. Same pattern, belongings left behind, no one saw him leave. And here, Sarah added, 3 children from the same family, 2007, community pool in Gainesville. Ages 6, 8, and 11. Always children, always from pools, always without a trace. He's been doing this for 40 years, Torres said quietly. And based on this evidence, the Castellano boys weren't his first victims, they were his apprentices. The realization hit them both at the same time. If Ethan, Marcus, and Joey had been groomed to become accomplices, if they'd graduated from the underground chambers in the mid-1990s, then they'd been adults for nearly 3 decades. Adults with specialized knowledge of how to approach children, how to gain their trust, how to make them disappear without leaving evidence. We need to find them, Sarah said. Not as victims anymore, as suspects. Torres was already reaching for his phone. I'm calling for a federal task force. This isn't just a cold case anymore. This is an active serial predator ring, and it's been operating for decades. As he made the call, Sarah stared at the evidence spread across the table. 30 years ago, she'd been a rookie detective knocking on doors, asking neighbors if they'd seen 3 missing boys. Now she realized the question should have been different. She should have asked if anyone had seen 3 boys leaving. Hashtag December 15th, 1996. Location, underground chamber system, Palmetto Springs. The ceremony was simple but profound. Teacher had explained it to them for weeks. This was their graduation day, the moment when they would transition from students to guardians, from protected children to protectors of other children. Ethan stood at attention in Chamber 1, now 13 years old and tall enough that he had to duck slightly under the lowest part of the ceiling. Beside him, Marcus at 11 had grown lean and serious, while 9-year-old Joey still carried some of his childhood softness but had learned to stand perfectly still during important moments. 3 years, 7 months, and 12 days, teacher said, consulting a notebook filled with careful records. That's how long you've been safe here. How long you've been learning what the world really is, what families really need. The boys nodded in unison. They'd practiced this moment, rehearsed their responses, understood their roles and what came next. The surface world has grown even more dangerous in your absence, teacher continued. More parents abandon their children. More families break apart. More children are left unprotected, unloved, uncared for. He gestured toward a stack of newspapers and magazines that he'd brought down over the years, proof of the chaos and cruelty above ground. Ethan had read every article. Child abuse cases, custody battles, parents who killed their own children in fits of rage or neglect. The evidence was overwhelming. The surface world was not safe for children. But you 3, teacher said, his voice warm with what sounded like genuine pride. You have learned the truth. You understand what real family means, what real protection looks like. And now you're ready to help other children find the same safety you've found. He handed each boy a small silver pin, roughly shaped like a key. These mark you as graduates. Protectors. Guardians of the truth. Joey looked at his pin with wide eyes. Despite 3 years underground, he still retained some of his childhood wonder. Are we going to help other kids not be scared? Exactly, teacher said, crouching down to Joey's level. Just like I helped you not be scared. Remember how frightened you were the first night? How you cried and wanted to go back to the dangerous world above? Joey nodded solemnly. He barely remembered that first night now, but teacher reminded them often of how terrified and confused they'd been before they learned better. And now you understand that everything I told you was true. Your mother did stop looking for you. Your old life did disappear. But your new life, your real life, is here with your real family. Teacher gestured to encompass all 3 boys. Brothers who will never leave you, never betray you, never grow tired of protecting you. Marcus spoke up, his voice carefully controlled. What about the other children? The ones who still live in danger? This was the heart of the graduation ceremony, the moment teacher had been building toward for months. That's your mission now. Your purpose. You'll help me identify children who need protection, families who need guidance. Children who are suffering the way you were suffering. He led them to Chamber 7, his office, where maps of Central Florida covered one wall. Red pins marked locations where he'd observed families, documented children at risk. Yellow pins showed successful interventions, children who had been brought to safety over the years. Each of these represents a child who was saved, teacher explained, pointing to the yellow pins. Children who were removed from harmful situations and given the chance to learn what you've learned. Ethan studied the map, counting the pins. There were dozens of them, scattered across the state. Where are they now? Safe, teacher said simply. Living with guardian families who understand their needs. Some have graduated and become guardians themselves. Others are still learning, still growing into their roles. He turned to face the 3 boys directly. Your first assignment will be observation. You'll help me identify families where children are at risk. Parents who work too much, who leave their children unsupervised, who don't truly understand the dangers of the modern world. Marcus raised his hand slightly, a habit from years of structured lessons. How will we know which children need help? Teacher smiled, the expression both proud and cold. You'll recognize them because they'll remind you of yourselves. Lonely children, neglected children, children whose parents are too busy or too selfish to properly protect them. He paused, letting that sink in. Children playing alone at public pools. Hashtag August 17th, 2023. Location, FBI Tampa Field Office, Task Force Room. The federal task force assembled in less than 12 hours. Representatives from FBI Behavioral Analysis, the Florida Department of Law Enforcement, and police departments from 6 counties filled the conference room. On the wall, a timeline stretched from 1985 to 2023, marked with red dots for confirmed disappearances and yellow dots for suspected cases. Agent Torres stood before the assembled team, a laser pointer in his hand. Ladies and gentlemen, we're dealing with what appears to be a multi-generational criminal organization. What started as the actions of a single predator has evolved into a systematic network. Detective Chun added her findings from the evidence analysis. We've identified 37 cases across Florida that match the established pattern. Children disappearing from public pools with no witnesses, no evidence, and no trace. The earliest confirmed case dates to 1985, the most recent to 2021. FBI behavioral analyst Dr. Rebecca Mills stepped forward. Tall, sharp-eyed, with the kind of clinical detachment that came from years of studying humanity's darkest impulses. Based on the journals and documentation found in the chambers, we're looking at a sophisticated indoctrination program. The original perpetrator, we're calling him the teacher, spent years conditioning the Castellano brothers to view their abduction as salvation. She clicked to a slide showing excerpts from Ethan's journal. By age 15, Ethan was writing entries like this. Help teacher identify a prospect family in Clearwater. 3 children, ages 6 to 10, minimal supervision at community pool. Parents both work full-time, often arrive late for pickup. Children would benefit from protection. The room fell silent. These weren't the words of a victim. They were the observations of a willing participant. The indoctrination was so complete, Dr. Mills continued, that the boys appear to have genuinely believed they were helping other children by facilitating their abduction. In their minds, they weren't committing crimes. They were performing rescues. Sheriff Martinez from Polk County raised his hand. What about physical evidence? DNA, fingerprints, anything that could help us identify these guys as adults? Agent Torres pulled up crime scene photos from the chambers. We found DNA evidence in multiple chambers, both from the original victims and from more recent activity. The lab is running comparisons against national databases, but so far no matches in the system. Because they've never been arrested, Detective Chun said grimly. 30 years of criminal activity, and they've never left enough evidence to be caught. The next phase of the investigation focused on the surveillance files found in Chamber 7. Each folder represented months of observation, detailed records of children's routines and family dynamics. But what disturbed the task force most were the evaluation criteria scrawled in the margins. Suitable. Parents work long hours. Children often unsupervised. High priority. Single-parent families. Limited support network. Ideal candidates. Multiple children close in age. Frequent pool visits. It's a shopping list, Detective Chin said, reviewing one of the folders. They were literally shopping for families to destroy. Dr. Mills nodded. And the selection criteria tell us something important about their psychology. They weren't choosing children randomly. They were targeting families that reminded them of their own situation. Busy parents. Children left to fend for themselves. Minimal supervision. Agent Torres found the most recent folder, dated 2021. Inside were photographs of a family at a community pool in Sarasota. A mother with 3 young sons, ages 5, 7, and 9. The photos showed the family over multiple visits, with notes tracking the children's behavior patterns and the mother's schedule. This family, Torres said, holding up the surveillance photos. They were being targeted 2 years ago. We need to find them, make sure they're safe. The mother was Maria Santos, a nurse practitioner who'd recently moved to Florida from California. When contacted by the FBI, she confirmed that her 3 sons had been regular visitors to the Sarasota community pool during the summer of 2021. My boys loved that pool, she told Detective Chin over the phone. We went almost every day after I got off work. They're all strong swimmers, very responsible. I never worried about them there. Did you ever notice anyone paying unusual attention to your family? Any maintenance workers or other adults who seemed to take an interest in your boys? Maria paused, thinking. Actually, yes. There was this man, older, maybe in his 40s. He was always friendly, said he was with pool maintenance. The boys liked him because he knew so much about how the filtration systems worked. He even offered to give them a behind-the-scenes tour of the equipment room. Detective Chun felt her pulse quicken. Did you let them take the tour? No, thank God. My oldest son Alex was interested, but something just felt off. I told them we needed to stick to the pool area only. The man seemed disappointed, but he didn't push it. After hanging up, Chin stared at the surveillance photos of the Santos family. 3 boys, so similar in age to the Castellano brothers. A mother working long hours, trying to provide for her children while giving them some normalcy during their Florida summer. It could have been 1993 all over again. They're still active, she told Torres. And they're still using the same methods. The breakthrough came from an unexpected source. While reviewing the physical evidence from the chambers, forensic technicians discovered something that had been overlooked in the initial sweep. A hidden compartment in Chamber 7 containing a small electronic device. It's a digital recorder, the tech explained, holding up a device no larger than a thumb drive. Looks like it was used to document sessions, maybe training sessions for new recruits. The audio files on the device were chilling. Recorded conversations between the teacher and the Castellano brothers as teenagers, discussing techniques for approaching children, gaining trust, identifying vulnerable families. Remember, the key is patience, the teacher's voice explained in one recording. You don't rush the approach. You become part of the environment first. Maintenance worker, lifeguard, pool supervisor. Someone who belongs there, someone parents expect to see. Ethan's voice, now deeper with adolescence. What if the parents are suspicious? Then you move on to a different family. There are always more children who need help. Always more families that don't understand how to properly protect their sons and daughters. But it was the final recording that provided the task force with their first real lead. A conversation dated 1998, discussing the expansion of operations. The Clearwater facility is nearly ready, the teacher said. Marcus and Joey will oversee operations there while Ethan continues working with me in the central region. Each location will be autonomous but connected, sharing information and resources. Multiple facilities, multiple teams. The scope of the operation was far larger than anyone had imagined. We're not looking for 3 individuals, Agent Torres told the task force. We're looking for a criminal network that's been growing for 3 decades. Hashtag June 8th, 1999. Location, Clearwater Community Pool. The approach required perfect timing. Marcus, now 16 and tall enough to pass for a college student, had been observing the Morrison family for 6 weeks. Every Tuesday and Thursday afternoon, Jennifer Morrison brought her twin daughters to the community pool while she caught up on work emails from a lounge chair in the shade. The girls, Emma and Sophie, were 8 years old and identical except for their swimming suits. Emma preferred blue. Sophie always wore pink. They were confident swimmers, but still young enough to be impressed by an older boy who could do backflips off the diving board. "Wow," Emma called out as Marcus surfaced from his latest flip. "Can you teach us how to do that?" Marcus smiled, the expression warm and genuine. After 6 years of training with teacher, he'd learned to project exactly the right combination of friendliness and authority. Maybe when you're a little older. Those flips can be dangerous if you don't know what you're doing. Sophie swam closer, treading water with easy strokes. "Are you a lifeguard?" "Not officially," Marcus said, "but I know a lot about pool safety. I help out at different pools around the area, making sure kids stay safe." He gestured toward their mother, who was absorbed in her laptop. "Your mom works hard, doesn't she?" The girls nodded. Their father had recently taken a job that required extensive travel, leaving Jennifer to manage both the household and her own demanding career in marketing. "It must be tough, being responsible for everything," Marcus continued, his voice taking on a tone of gentle sympathy. "I bet she doesn't get much time to just relax and have fun with you guys." Emma's face fell slightly. "She's always working. Even when we're here, she's usually on her computer." "That's what I thought," Marcus said, though he kept his expression neutral. A lot of parents are like that these days. They love their kids, but they get so caught up in work that they forget what's really important. This was the technique teacher had perfected over the years. Identify the child's emotional needs, validate their feelings of neglect or loneliness, then position yourself as someone who truly understands what they're going through. "I know someone who runs a really special swimming program," Marcus said casually. "It's for kids whose parents are always busy. They teach advanced techniques, water safety, even some cool tricks like underwater breathing exercises." Sophie's eyes lit up. "Really? Where is it?" "It's at a private facility, very exclusive. The instructor only works with kids who are really dedicated to swimming." Marcus glanced toward their mother, still focused on her laptop. "But it's kind of a secret program. They don't advertise because they only want serious swimmers." The hook was set. Over the next 2 weeks, Marcus continued building the relationship, appearing at the pool whenever the Morrison family visited. He showed the girls simple swimming tricks, shared stories about this special program, and gradually introduced the idea that their mother might not understand how advanced they were becoming. "Some parents get nervous about their kids excelling too quickly," he explained during one conversation. "They worry that their children are growing up too fast, leaving them behind. That's why the instructor prefers to work with kids independently." By the 3rd week, Emma and Sophie were begging to see the special facility. Marcus explained that he'd need to check with the instructor first, make sure they were ready for such an advanced program. "What would we need to do?" Emma asked eagerly. "Just meet with the instructor for an evaluation. He'd want to see your swimming skills. Make sure you understand the importance of safety and following instructions." Marcus paused, as if considering something important. "But it would have to be a private meeting. He doesn't like parents hovering during evaluations. It makes kids nervous and they don't perform as well." The plan was set for the following Thursday. Marcus would pick up the girls after school, bring them to the evaluation at the private facility, and have them back before their mother finished work. A simple afternoon adventure that would change their lives forever. But on Thursday morning, Jennifer Morrison called in sick to work and decided to spend the day at home with her daughters. The girls were disappointed. They'd been looking forward to meeting the special instructor. When their mother asked about their plans, Emma mentioned the swimming evaluation. "What's swimming evaluation?" Jennifer asked, a note of concern creeping into her voice. As the girls explained about Marcus and the special program, Jennifer felt a growing sense of unease. She'd noticed the teenage boy talking to her daughters at the pool, but she'd assumed he was just another kid enjoying his summer vacation. "Did this instructor ever talk to me about this program?" she asked. Sophie shook her head. "Marcus said you might not understand. He said some parents get nervous about special programs." Jennifer's maternal instincts kicked into high gear. She called the Clearwater Community Pool, asking if they knew anything about a special swimming program or an instructor who worked with children privately. "Ma'am," the pool manager said, "we don't have any affiliated programs like that, and we'd certainly never recommend that children meet with an instructor without parental supervision." Jennifer immediately called the police. When officers arrived at the pool that afternoon, Marcus was waiting in the parking lot, sitting in a borrowed car and checking his watch. He saw the police cruisers and knew immediately that something had gone wrong. He started the engine and drove away slowly, carefully, drawing no attention to himself. By the time the officers reached the pool area, he was gone. That evening, he called teacher from a payphone outside a gas station 20 miles away. "The Morrison family is compromised," he reported. The mother became suspicious. "We need to shut down the Clearwater operation." Teacher's voice was calm, unsurprised. "These things happen. Return to base. We'll reassess and identify new opportunities." Marcus hung up the phone and drove back toward Palmetto Springs, where the underground chambers waited like a sanctuary beneath the abandoned pool. The Morrison twins would continue their normal lives, unaware of how close they'd come to disappearing forever. But there would be other families, other children, other opportunities. The network teacher had built was patient, methodical, and adaptable. The work would continue. ## August 18th, 2023. Location: Clearwater, Florida. The abandoned facility sat at the edge of an industrial park, surrounded by a chain-link fence and overgrown with Florida scrub vegetation. From the outside, it looked like any other failed business venture. A concrete building with broken windows and graffitied walls, slowly being reclaimed by the subtropical climate. But FBI ground-penetrating radar revealed the same architectural signature they'd found at Palmetto Springs, an extensive underground chamber system, hidden beneath what had once been a legitimate swimming instruction facility. The business closed in 2003, Agent Torres explained to the assembled task force as they prepared to breach the building. Officially due to financial difficulties. But property records show it was purchased in 1997 by a shell company called Clearwater Youth Athletics. Detective Chun checked her notes. Same time frame as when Marcus would have been setting up the secondary operation. The entry team found the access point behind a false wall in what had been the facility's equipment room. Unlike the rough construction at Palmetto Springs, this underground complex showed signs of professional engineering, better ventilation, more sophisticated electrical systems, clearly designed for long-term use. "This isn't just an expansion," Dr. Mills observed as they descended into the chamber system. "This is an evolution. They learned from the original site and built something more advanced." The layout was disturbingly familiar. Sleeping chambers, a classroom area, storage rooms, and an observation post equipped with surveillance monitors. But this facility had something the original lacked: evidence of multiple occupancy periods. "Look at this," Detective Chin said, examining the sleeping chambers. There were 12 beds arranged in 3 rooms, each equipped with restraint points and personal storage areas. They weren't just holding individual families here. They were running some kind of group program. The documentation found in the facility's office area painted a picture of industrial-scale child trafficking. Intake records, medical files, and training schedules for dozens of children dating from 1999 to 2003. "Jesus Christ," Agent Torres whispered, reading through one of the files. "They had 43 children here over a 4-year period." Dr. Mills found the most disturbing evidence in a locked filing cabinet. Psychological evaluation reports written in clinical language that described the progress of various subjects through something called the integration program. Subject C, 47 shows excellent adaptation to structured environment, read one report. Demonstrates leadership potential and may be suitable for advanced training. Recommend promotion to mentor status upon completion of standard curriculum. They were using the older kids to help indoctrinate the younger ones, Dr. Mills explained. Creating a hierarchy where victims became accomplices, accomplices became leaders. It's a classic cult recruitment and retention strategy. The evidence suggested that the Clearwater facility had been used to train a new generation of operatives, children who'd been abducted, indoctrinated, and then taught to help with future abductions. A self-perpetuating system that could theoretically continue indefinitely. How many of these facilities are there? Detective Chen asked, staring at a map on the office wall that showed potential sites across the southeastern United States. Agent Torres was studying shipping manifests found in the files. Based on these records, at least 12. They were moving children between facilities, sharing resources, coordinating operations across multiple states. The scope of the conspiracy was staggering. What had started as one predator operating out of a hidden chamber beneath a community pool had grown into a sophisticated criminal network with facilities, personnel, and operational procedures spanning decades. But the most chilling discovery came when forensic accountants traced the financial records. The various shell companies and nonprofit organizations used to fund the network had received donations from legitimate sources, community organizations, churches, even government grants for at-risk youth programs. They were funding child trafficking operations with public money, Agent Torres said, his voice tight with controlled fury. Taking donations meant to help children and using them to systematically destroy families. The paper trail led to a current address in Jacksonville, a sprawling compound registered as the New Horizons Youth Development Center. According to its website, it was a residential facility for troubled teenagers, offering structured rehabilitation programs and family reunification services. That's where they are, Detective Chen said, studying satellite images of the compound. That's where we'll find the Castellano brothers. But first, they needed to understand exactly what they were walking into. The facility in Jacksonville was operational, legally registered, and currently housing dozens of teenagers. Any raid would need to be carefully planned to avoid harming innocent children who might be genuine residents of a legitimate program. We go in soft, Agent Torres decided. Undercover investigation first. Build a case, identify the targets. We can't risk a confrontation that puts children in danger. Dr. Mills was studying the psychological profiles they'd assembled. After 30 years of this lifestyle, the Castellano brothers won't see themselves as criminals. They'll genuinely believe they're helping children, saving families, protecting society from its own failures. Which makes them extremely dangerous, Detective Chen added. True believers are always the hardest to stop. ## November 14th, 2004. Location, New Horizons Youth Development Center, Jacksonville. The ribbon-cutting ceremony was a media success. Local politicians, community leaders, and child welfare advocates gathered to celebrate the opening of what appeared to be a state-of-the-art residential facility for at-risk youth. The building was modern, well-equipped, and staffed by professionals with impressive credentials in child psychology and social work. Ethan Castellano, now 21 and going by the name Dr. Nathan Cross, stood at the podium wearing a crisp suit and the kind of confident smile that put nervous parents at ease. New Horizons represents a revolutionary approach to youth development, he told the assembled crowd. We understand that traditional family structures sometimes fail our children. When that happens, we provide a new kind of family, one based on structure, safety, and genuine care for each child's long-term well-being. The audience applauded. Behind him, the gleaming facility stretched across 15 acres of landscaped grounds, complete with dormitories, classrooms, recreational areas, and what appeared to be a standard swimming pool. What the visitors couldn't see was the extensive underground complex that connected all the buildings, a network of chambers, tunnels, and holding areas that made the original Palmetto Springs operation look primitive by comparison. Marcus, now 19 and using the identity Michael Chase, served as the facility's director of recreational activities. His job was to identify children within the system who showed particular potential for advanced training, while also maintaining relationships with community organizations that might refer new candidates. Joey, 17 and operating under the name Joshua Carter, worked directly with the younger residents. His natural empathy and boyish appearance made him particularly effective at gaining the trust of newly arrived children who were confused, frightened, or resistant to the program. The three brothers had evolved far beyond their origins as victims. They were now administrators of a sophisticated operation that processed dozens of children each year, some legitimate referrals from overwhelmed social services, Others carefully selected acquisitions that would never be reported missing. The key is integration, Ethan explained to his brothers during one of their weekly planning meetings. They gathered in a conference room deep underground, surrounded by monitors showing feeds from throughout the facility. We mix legitimate cases with our special projects. The cover gives us credibility, funding, and most importantly, it provides a steady stream of candidates. The special projects, where children like the Morrison twins might have been, selected from stable families, but isolated through carefully constructed scenarios. Parents would be told their children were being transferred to specialized programs, or that they'd been selected for exclusive educational opportunities. By the time anyone questioned the arrangements, the children had been fully integrated into the New Horizons system. How many are ready for advancement? Marcus asked, reviewing files on the current residents. Joey consulted his notes. 7 in the current cohort show strong adaptation. 2 demonstrate leadership potential. I think we could move them to Phase 2 training within the next 6 months. Phase 2 was the advanced program where successful residents learned to help manage newer arrivals. They became counselors, mentors, and eventually recruiters, spreading the network's influence while genuinely believing they were helping other children escape harmful family situations. And the external recruitment? Ethan asked. Marcus smiled. We've identified 12 target families across North Florida. Single parents, financial stress, children who spend significant time unsupervised. The usual profiles. The system teacher had developed had evolved into something far more sophisticated than simple abduction. New Horizons offered legitimate services to genuinely troubled youth, while simultaneously operating as a recruitment and training center for future operatives. Children who arrived through official channels were evaluated for their potential usefulness. Those who showed promise were gradually separated from their families and integrated into the network's operations. Meanwhile, children acquired through more direct methods were processed through a carefully designed program that convinced them their families had voluntarily surrendered custody, that they'd been abandoned or given up for their own protection. The beautiful thing, Ethan often told his brothers, is that we're actually helping these children. We're giving them purpose, structure, and a real family, something most of them never had in the outside world. And to a large extent, the children agreed. The program was designed to provide genuine benefits, education, counseling, recreational activities, and most importantly, a sense of belonging. Many residents thrived in the structured environment, developing skills and confidence they'd never had in their previous lives. The tragedy was that they were thriving in a system designed to perpetuate itself through the systematic destruction of other families. By 2010, New Horizons had processed over 200 children. Some had been successfully returned to their families or transitioned to independent living. Others had become permanent staff members, dedicated to helping the next generation of residents find the same safety and purpose they discovered. And a select few had been chosen for special assignments, establishing new facilities, identifying new target populations, expanding the network's reach across the southeastern United States. The 3 brothers who had once cried themselves to sleep in underground chambers now oversaw an operation that spanned multiple states and processed hundreds of children each year. They genuinely believed they were making the world a better place, one rescued child at a time. The fact that they were destroying countless families in the process was simply the price of doing necessary work. Hashtag August 20th, 2023. Location, Jacksonville, Florida. FBI Special Agent Lisa Park adjusted her wire as she walked through the front doors of New Horizons Youth Development Center. Her cover identity was solid. She was Dr. Lisa Patterson, a child psychologist researching innovative treatment programs for at-risk youth. Her credentials were real, her expertise genuine, her purpose anything but innocent. Dr. Patterson, welcome, said the young man who greeted her in the lobby. He looked to be in his mid-30s, with prematurely gray hair and the kind of soft smile that immediately put people at ease. I'm Joshua Carter, one of the resident counselors. Dr. Cross is looking forward to meeting with you. Agent Park shook his hand, studying his face. Could this friendly, professional-looking man really be Joey Castellano, the 6-year-old who disappeared from a Florida pool 30 years ago? The lobby was impressive, modern furniture, inspirational artwork, comfortable seating areas where families could visit with their children. Everything about the facility screamed legitimacy and professional competence. "Tell me about your approach here," Agent Park said as Joshua led her down a hallway lined with photos of smiling teenagers engaged in various activities. "We believe in holistic development," Joshua explained. "Many of our residents come from unstable family situations, abuse, neglect, parents who simply aren't equipped to handle children with special needs. We provide structure, safety, and most importantly, a sense of belonging." They passed a common room where a dozen teenagers were engaged in what looked like a group therapy session. The scene appeared completely normal, even beneficial. "How long do children typically stay in your program?" "It varies," Joshua said. "Some residents benefit from short-term intervention, 6 months to a year. Others need longer-term support. We've had some residents who chose to stay and become staff members. They understand the program from the inside and can really connect with newer arrivals." Agent Park noted the casual mention of residents becoming staff, exactly the pattern the FBI task force had identified from the evidence at previous facilities. They reached a conference room where 2 other men were waiting. The older one, probably late 30s, stood and extended his hand with practiced professional warmth. "Dr. Patterson, I'm Dr. Nathan Cross, the facility director. This is Michael Chase, our director of activities." The second man nodded politely but remained seated, studying her with sharp, evaluative eyes. Agent Park found herself face-to-face with the 3 Castellano brothers for the first time in 30 years. They looked nothing like the scared children in the 1993 missing persons photos, but the family resemblance was unmistakable once you knew what to look for. "I'm particularly interested in your family integration programs," she said, settling into a chair across from them. "How do you maintain connections between residents and their biological families?" The 3 men exchanged a quick glance, so brief that anyone not specifically watching for it would have missed it entirely. "Family relationships are complex," Dr. Cross, Ethan, said carefully. "Sometimes the most loving thing we can do is help children understand that their biological families may not be equipped to provide the support they need. Many of our residents come to us after experiencing significant trauma or neglect," Michael added. "Part of our therapeutic process involves helping them develop new, healthier concepts of what family means." Agent Park pushed gently. "What about children who were removed from stable homes due to temporary circumstances? Economic hardship, parental illness, that sort of thing?" Another glance passed between the brothers. Joshua leaned forward slightly. "Dr. Patterson, can I ask what prompted your interest in our program specifically? We don't usually get researchers from outside the immediate area." The question was asked casually, but Agent Park could feel the sudden tension in the room. These men had survived for 30 years by being cautious, by recognizing threats before they materialized. "I've been following some concerning patterns in child welfare systems across the Southeast," she said, sticking close to the truth. "Children entering residential programs and then losing contact with their families, even in cases where reunification should have been possible." The silence stretched for several seconds. Then Ethan smiled, the expression perfectly friendly and completely cold. "I think there may be some misunderstanding about our mission here," he said. "We're not a temporary placement facility. We work with children who have been determined to need long-term residential care. Children whose families have either voluntarily relinquished custody or been found unfit by the courts." "Of course," Agent Park said. "I'd love to review some case files, if that's possible. Obviously with all identifying information redacted." "I'm afraid that won't be possible," Michael said flatly. "Client confidentiality is paramount in our work." The meeting continued for another 20 minutes, but Agent Park had learned what she needed to know. The men sitting across from her were intelligent, experienced, and extremely suspicious of any outside scrutiny. They'd built a sophisticated operation that could withstand casual inspection, but they were still operating on the assumption that they were smarter than law enforcement. That assumption was about to be tested. As Joshua walked her back to the lobby, Agent Park made one final attempt to gather intelligence. "This is such an impressive facility," she said. "How long has it been in operation?" "Nearly 20 years, Joshua replied. "Dr. Cross was instrumental in the original design. He has a real vision for helping children who've been failed by traditional systems. He seems very dedicated. Has he been working with at-risk youth his whole career?" Joshua smiled, and for just a moment, Agent Park saw something genuine in his expression, a flash of the 6-year-old boy who'd once trusted a maintenance worker at a community pool. "Dr. Cross saved my life," he said quietly. "When I was young, I was in a really bad situation. My family, well, let's just say they weren't equipped to take care of children. Dr. Cross showed me what real protection looks like, what real family means." The tragic irony hit Agent Park like a physical blow. Joey Castellano genuinely believed that his abductor had saved him. After 30 years of indoctrination, he saw his kidnapping as a rescue and his captivity as protection. "I'm sure you're very grateful," she managed to say. "Every day," Joshua replied. "And now I get to help other children find the same safety I found. It's the most rewarding work imaginable." As Agent Park drove away from New Horizons, she called Agent Torres on her encrypted phone. "It's them," she said without preamble. "All 3 brothers, running the facility exactly like we thought. And Torres? They have no idea they're criminals. They genuinely believe they're helping children." "That's going to make this complicated," Torres replied. "True believers are always the most dangerous. There's something else. The facility is legitimate enough that it would pass most inspections. They're mixing real social services with their operations. Some of those kids probably do need help." "How many children are in the facility?" Agent Park checked her notes. "I counted at least 40 teenagers during my tour. Could be more in areas I didn't see." "Jesus, we're going to need a full child protective services team for the raid. We can't just go in with SWAT and hope for the best." As they spoke, Agent Park drove past a small sign she'd missed on the way in. "New Horizons Family Counseling Services, helping families reunite. Appointments available." The bitter irony was overwhelming. The Castellano brothers, who had spent 30 years believing they'd been abandoned by their mother, were now advertising family reunification services while systematically destroying other families. The raid was scheduled for dawn on August 22nd. ## August 22nd, 2023. Location: New Horizons Youth Development Center, Jacksonville. The operation began at 5:47 a.m., just as the Florida sun was beginning to paint the eastern sky pink and gold. FBI agents, Child Protective Services workers, and local police surrounded the New Horizons facility with the kind of precision that comes from weeks of planning and the knowledge that children's lives hung in the balance. Detective Chun sat in the command vehicle, listening to radio chatter as teams moved into position. After 30 years of carrying the Castellano case, she'd insisted on being present for the resolution, even though this was now a federal operation. "Team Alpha in position at the main entrance," crackled through the radio. "Team Beta securing the perimeter. Team Charlie ready at the service entrance." The plan was to execute simultaneous entries at multiple points, preventing anyone from retreating to the underground complex while minimizing trauma to the resident children. Child psychologists were standing by to help explain the situation to confused teenagers who might not understand what was happening. Agent Torres gave the final command. "All teams, go." The facility's main doors opened before the agents could breach them. Ethan Castellano, Dr. Nathan Cross, stood in the doorway wearing a bathrobe and the expression of a man who'd been expecting this moment for some time. "Agents," he said calmly, "I assume you have a warrant." "We do," Agent Torres replied, approaching with his weapon drawn but lowered. "Dr. Cross, you're under arrest for kidnapping, child trafficking, and conspiracy." Ethan raised his hands slowly, cooperatively. "May I ask what took you so long?" The question caught Torres off guard. "What do you mean? We've been operating for 30 years, helping hundreds of children, saving them from families that didn't want them, couldn't protect them, or actively harmed them." Ethan's voice remained perfectly calm as the handcuffs clicked around his wrists. "I assumed someone would eventually misunderstand our mission." Marcus and Joey were arrested without resistance in their respective quarters. Like their older brother, they seemed more resigned than surprised, as if they'd always known this day would come. The most challenging part of the operation was securing the 43 children currently residing at the facility. Many were legitimate cases, teenagers who'd been placed in the program through proper legal channels and were receiving genuine therapeutic services. But others had been acquired through the network's more questionable methods. "We need to sort them carefully," Dr. Mills explained to the Child Protective Services team. "Some of these kids have been here for years. They may not remember their original families, or they may have been convinced that their families abandoned them. In the underground complex, investigators found evidence that made the earlier discoveries look primitive. A full medical facility, complete with surgical equipment and pharmaceutical storage. Multiple computer terminals connected to databases tracking children across the southeastern United States. And most disturbing of all, detailed psychological profiles and training records for dozens of young adults who'd been processed through the facility's advanced programs. They weren't just trafficking children, Agent Torres reported to Detective Chun. They were manufacturing operatives, creating adults who'd been programmed from childhood to recruit other children. The scale of the network became clear as investigators traced the computer files. New Horizons wasn't just a facility. It was the headquarters of an operation that included at least 15 other locations across 6 states. Each site was registered as a legitimate youth services organization, funded through government grants and private donations. Jesus Christ, Detective Chun whispered, looking at the organizational chart displayed on one of the monitors. They built an empire. At the center of the chart was a photograph she recognized immediately, an elderly man with kind eyes and a grandfatherly smile. The original teacher, now in his 80s, listed as founder emeritus of something called the National Youth Protection Initiative. He's still alive, Agent Torres said, reading over her shoulder. Still running operations from a facility in rural Georgia. The arrest of the Castellano brothers triggered a coordinated federal response across multiple states. By noon, simultaneous raids were underway at facilities in Alabama, Georgia, Tennessee, North Carolina, and South Carolina. The evidence found at each location painted the same picture. Sophisticated operations masquerading as legitimate youth services while systematically processing children through indoctrination programs. But the most heartbreaking discoveries came during the interviews with the children rescued from New Horizons. Many had no memory of their lives before the facility. Others remembered their families, but had been convinced that they'd been abandoned or given up for adoption. "My mom didn't want me anymore," explained one 16-year-old girl who'd been brought to New Horizons at age 8. "Dr. Cross showed me the papers. She signed them herself." The papers were sophisticated forgeries, designed to convince children that their disappearances had been legal and voluntary. Many of the rescued children would require years of therapy to undo the psychological damage of their indoctrination. ## August 22, 2023. Location: FBI Tampa Field Office, Interview Room A. Ethan Castellano sat across from Detective Chun and Agent Torres, his hands folded calmly on the metal table. Even in orange jail scrubs, he maintained the composed demeanor of a professional discussing a complex case with colleagues. "I suppose you want me to express remorse," he said when Torres finished reading his rights. "Or perhaps break down and confess to crimes I don't believe I've committed." Detective Chun leaned forward. "Ethan, we found evidence of over 400 children who passed through your network over the past 3 decades. Hundreds of families destroyed. How can you not see that as criminal?" Ethan's expression didn't change. "Detective, how many of those children came from homes where they were being abused, neglected, left to raise themselves while their parents pursued careers or relationships or addictions?" "That's not the point." "It's exactly the point." Ethan's voice remained calm, but there was steel underneath. "The system failed those children long before we found them. We provided structure, education, purpose. We gave them real families, people who genuinely cared about their well-being." Agent Torres pulled out a photograph from the evidence files. Maria Castellano at a press conference in 1994, tears streaming down her face as she begged for information about her missing sons. "What about your real family, Ethan? Your mother spent 30 years wondering if you were alive. She died 5 years ago, still hoping you'd come home." For the first time, something flickered in Ethan's eyes. Pain, perhaps, or doubt. But it passed quickly. "My mother left us alone at that pool," he said quietly. "She chose her errands over our safety. Teachers showed us the truth about what really happened that day, how easily she gave up, how quickly she moved on with her life. That's not true. She never stopped looking. She remarried within 2 years," Ethan interrupted. "Had another child. Started a new family to replace the sons she'd lost through her own negligence." Detective Chun felt her heart break for the scared 10-year-old boy who'd been convinced that his mother had abandoned him. "She remarried because she was grieving, Ethan." Because she needed support to keep searching for you. She never stopped loving you. Ethan was quiet for a long moment. Then, it doesn't matter now. We became something better than what we were. We helped hundreds of children find the same transformation. The interview continued for hours, but Ethan never wavered from his core belief that he and his brothers had been saved from a dangerous world and had dedicated their lives to saving other children in turn. The tragedy wasn't that he was lying. It was that he genuinely believed every word. Hashtag August 25th, 2023. Location, rural Georgia. The teacher's final facility was hidden deep in the Georgia woods, disguised as a retreat center for troubled youth. When federal agents arrived, they found an 83-year-old man in failing health, surrounded by a staff of young adults who defended him with the fierce loyalty of devoted children protecting a beloved grandfather. Douglas Renner, the teacher, was arrested without incident. Like the Castellano brothers, he showed no surprise at the arrival of law enforcement, no anger at being caught. He seemed almost relieved. "I always knew this day would come," he told Agent Torres during his first interview. "The world isn't ready for what we built. People can't understand that sometimes destruction is necessary to prevent greater harm." The evidence found at his facility provided the final pieces of the puzzle. Detailed records going back to 1975, showing how he developed and refined his methods over nearly 50 years. Personal journals documenting his philosophy, his techniques, and his genuine belief that he was protecting children from an increasingly dangerous society. "I never took a child who was truly wanted," he wrote in one entry. "I observed families for months, sometimes years, before acting. I only intervened when I was certain the child would be better served by removal from their situation." The tragic irony was that some of his early assessments hadn't been entirely wrong. Several of the families he'd targeted in the 1980s and 1990s had indeed been struggling with serious problems: addiction, domestic violence, financial instability. But instead of providing support or intervention, he'd simply stolen their children and convinced them they were better off without their families. Hashtag October 15th, 2023. Location, Palmetto Springs Memorial Garden. The memorial service was held on a clear autumn morning in the park that had been built over the old Palmetto Springs community pool. 3 small headstones bore the names of Ethan, Marcus, and Joey Castellano, along with the dates of their birth and disappearance. Maria Castellano's grave was nearby, marked with fresh flowers and a photograph of her 3 sons from the summer of 1993. Detective Chun stood with several dozen other attendees, family members of victims, FBI agents who'd worked the case, and representatives from the various law enforcement agencies that had been involved in dismantling the network. Father Miguel Santos delivered a brief eulogy for children who had died not in body but in spirit, whose identities had been so thoroughly erased that they could never truly come home. "We gather today not just to mourn what was lost," he said, "but to remember that even in the darkest circumstances, love persists." Maria Castellano never stopped loving her sons, never stopped believing they might return. That love was not diminished by time, distance, or the terrible things that happened to those boys. After the service, Detective Chun placed a small toy car beside Joey's headstone, a red Matchbox police cruiser she'd found in an evidence box, something the 6-year-old had been carrying in his pocket the day he disappeared. "I'm sorry it took so long to bring you home," she whispered. The investigation had ultimately identified 847 children who had passed through the teacher's network over 5 decades. Some had been returned to families who'd never stopped searching. Others had been reunited with relatives who'd given them up for dead. Many chose to remain in protective custody while they underwent therapy to recover memories and identities that had been systematically suppressed. The 3 Castellano brothers were serving life sentences in federal prison. In their cells, investigators found letters they'd written but never sent, letters to the mother they'd been taught to forget, expressing love and confusion and a desperate desire to understand what had really happened to their family. The letters would be sealed in the case files, unread by anyone except the investigators who discovered them. Some truths were too painful to share. Hashtag December 20th, 2023. Location, FBI Tampa Field Office. Detective Chun closed the final case file with a sense of completion that had eluded her for 15 years. The Castellano investigation was officially closed, the network dismantled, the perpetrators imprisoned. Justice had been served, even if it had come 30 years too late. But on her desk lay a new file, thin but troubling. 3 children had disappeared from a water park in Orlando the previous week. Security cameras showed them entering the facility with their father, but only the father was seen leaving. He claimed the children had never arrived, that he dropped them off at their mother's house instead. The mother insisted she'd never seen them. Agent Torres knocked on her doorframe. "Chun, you got a minute?" She looked up from the new case file. "Please tell me this isn't connected to the network." "We don't think so. The teacher and his top lieutenants are all in custody." "But," he hesitated, "we've identified 47 individuals who went through the advanced training programs and were released into the general population over the years. Adults who were programmed as children to see family separation as rescue." Detective Chun felt a familiar chill. "You think some of them are still active?" "We think it's possible. The network was destroyed, but the ideology survives in the people it created." Torres placed a thick folder on her desk. "These are the ones we haven't been able to locate yet." She opened the folder to reveal surveillance photos, psychological profiles, and last known addresses for dozens of individuals who'd been processed through the teacher's facilities as children. Most were now in their 20s and 30s, living normal-appearing lives throughout the country. But scattered among their files were reports of suspicious activity, unexplained interest in children's activities, employment at youth organizations, proximity to recent disappearances. "How many more are out there?" Chen asked. "We don't know. Maybe dozens. Maybe hundreds." The teacher's operation spanned 50 years and processed thousands of children. Some died in custody, some were returned to their families, some were successfully deprogrammed. But others, he trailed off. Others learned the lessons too well. Torres nodded. "We've created a joint task force to track down the remaining network alumni. But Chun, this could take decades. We're essentially hunting people who've been programmed since childhood to see themselves as heroes, not criminals." Detective Chun looked at the Orlando case file, then at the folder full of former network operatives, then at the photo on her desk of 3 little boys playing in a swimming pool on the last normal day of their lives. Some cases never really ended. They just transformed, evolved, found new ways to break hearts and destroy families. The teacher was in prison, his network was dismantled, but the philosophy he'd spread, the idea that some children needed to be saved from their own families, would likely outlive him by generations. She picked up the Orlando file and opened it to the first page. 3 children, 3 families destroyed, 3 investigations that would consume years of her life and possibly lead to dozens more cases, more networks, more children who would vanish into systems designed to convince them they were being saved. "I'll take the Orlando case," she told Torres, "because someone had to keep looking. Someone had to remember that behind every missing child was a family that would never stop hoping, never stop searching, never stop believing that love could survive even the most carefully constructed lies." The work continued. #Epilogue. August 22, 2024. Location: Palmetto Springs Memorial Garden. 1 year after the arrests, Detective Chun returned to the Memorial Garden on a hot summer morning that reminded her of that first day in 1993 when 3 little boys had walked into a community pool and never come home. The garden was peaceful, well-maintained by volunteers who'd lost their own children over the years. Fresh flowers marked each memorial stone, and a small playground at the center allowed visiting families to watch their children play in safety. A woman approached while Chun was placing new flowers at the Castellano Memorial. She was young, maybe early 30s, with dark hair and the kind of cautious demeanor that suggested recent trauma. "Excuse me," the woman said. "Are you Detective Chin, the one who worked the case?" Chin nodded. "Can I help you?" The woman hesitated, then pulled out an old photograph. It showed 3 young men in their 20s standing together outside what looked like a residential facility. Their faces were older, harder than the children who'd disappeared in 1993, but the family resemblance was unmistakable. "My name is Sarah Mitchell," the woman said. "I was a resident at New Horizons from 2018 to 2021. The Castellano brothers, they saved my life." Chun felt her chest tighten. "Sarah, I understand this is complicated, but those men—" "I know what they did," Sarah interrupted. "I know about the other children, the families that were destroyed. I know they were criminals." She paused, her voice breaking slightly. But I also know that when I arrived at New Horizons, I was broken, suicidal. My family had given up on me, and I'd given up on myself. She touched the photograph gently. Joshua, Joey, he spent hours talking me through panic attacks. Ethan taught me that I was worth something, that I could build a life worth living. Marcus showed me how to trust people again. Chin didn't know what to say. The complexity of the case, the gray areas between salvation and destruction, still haunted everyone who'd been involved in the investigation. I'm not saying what they did was right, Sarah continued. Taking children from their families, lying to them about being abandoned, that was evil. But the care they gave us, the genuine love and support, that was real too. She handed Chin a letter. I wrote to them in prison. I wanted them to know that some of the children they helped are okay, that we're building good lives. I thought you should know too. Chin accepted the letter but didn't open it. Some truths were too complex to process immediately. Sarah, are you getting help? Therapy, support services? The young woman nodded. The FBI connected me with specialists who work with cult survivors. It's hard, learning to trust my own memories and feelings. But I'm getting there. After Sarah left, Chin sat alone in the memorial garden for a long time. Children played on the swings and slides, their laughter carrying across the peaceful space. Parents watched from benches, protective but not paranoid, giving their children the gift of normal summer afternoons. The Orlando case had led to another network, smaller but no less devastating. That investigation had revealed connections to operations in Texas and California. The work continued, would always continue, because people like the teacher would always find ways to rationalize the destruction of families in the name of protecting children. But there was also hope. Survivors like Sarah who'd found ways to heal, to build meaningful lives despite the trauma they'd endured. Families reunited after decades of separation. Communities that had learned to be more vigilant, more protective, without becoming paranoid. Detective Chin opened Sarah's letter as the sun began to set over the memorial garden. Inside was a simple message, written in careful handwriting. Thank you for finding the truth. It didn't bring them home, but it brought them peace. Sometimes that's enough. At the bottom, Sarah had included a photograph of herself at college graduation, surrounded by friends, and wearing a smile that looked genuine and hard-earned. Chun folded the letter carefully and placed it in her jacket pocket. Tomorrow there would be new cases, new mysteries, new families whose lives had been shattered by people who believed they were helping. But tonight, she would remember that sometimes the lost could still find their way home, even if the journey took longer than anyone had hoped. The work continued, and so did the healing.